I did this about a year ago and I haven't looked at it since, so this may be a bit bumpy. Right, so my presentation is called The Triumph of Logos, a sample presentation. Right, so here my real-life situation. I've read two books. One of them is The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, which is... Andy, what's wrong?
Dawkins. What a joke.
You can't dismiss them so easily. So, one is The God Delusion by Dawkins, which is a book that very powerfully argues why God doesn't exist, or why it's extraordinarily unlikely he exists. Okay? The second book is another book I've been reading more. I read this maybe 5 years ago. This is a more recent one, The Case for God by Karen Armstrong. Okay? And what she's laying out is the reasons why God does exist. Okay? And it's very interesting because this whole book is written primarily in terms of sense perception and reason. Okay? This book is written primarily in terms of emotion and language. Okay? So they're two very contrasting ways to approach this central question of whether God exists or not. So it kind of got me to thinking about the Greek ideas of logos and mythos, which were two of the original ways of knowing way back when. Okay? If we think about logos, logos is very based on the sense perception and reason, whereas mythos is based on language and emotion. Okay? So logos is very much science and maths, mythos might be religion and art. Okay? Logos is about literalism and understanding things, as they are. Mythos is about interpretation and reading between the lines. Logos is objective, whereas mythos is subjective. Logos is black and white. Mythos is grey. Okay? Logos is about reason. Okay? Mythos is about meaning. What's the deep meaning behind this? Logos is about planning and deciding, whereas mythos is more about thinking and understanding. Okay? So, if we look at an example, if we look at the Genesis account of creation from the Bible, with logos, you might say, well, there's no evidence for God's existence. The timescale given is clearly wrong. The earth was initially covered by water, and that's kind of right. Terrestrial plants are fertilised, that kind of makes some sense. Whales and terrestrial plants are life, that doesn't make sense. Whales and seabirds developing before terrestrial animals, clearly nonsense. No genetic evidence from a first couple in Adam and Eve. So clearly, there is no truth in Genesis. It's clearly completely wrong. That's from a logos perspective. With mythos, you might say, the earth is ours to exploit. These are the messages you might read from Genesis. The earth is ours to exploit, but it pretty much says that. This brings great responsibility. Yeah, sure. Humans are inherently flawed. I think we can all agree with that. Life is a quest for redemption. Well, you may agree with that, you may not, but a lot of people feel it is. Okay? Knowledge can be dangerous, for sure. Life necessarily involves suffering. And for sure it does. Okay? So Genesis contains much truth. So depending on your mindset, you can, Genesis account of creation can mean very, very different things. So that got me thinking, to what extent is the triumph of logos a reasonable thing? Okay? And by logos, I'm talking about reason and sense, rather than emotion and language. Okay? So the triumph of logos, really, if we just look back, pre-Enlightenment, we had René Descartes with the idea, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And that was, so the foundation of all knowledge was really, the place to start was with thinking. Okay? Sort of a priori stuff. Yeah? Then along came the Enlightenment, 1650 to 1800, something like that. And reason started to try, and the Enlightenment really pushed reason. Okay? Logical thought. And from that sprang science with theories and reasons. That was all sort of sense perception stuff. And I've got the Galaxy S3 there, because that's kind of the logical conclusion of logos. Okay. So where are we now? Now we're in a world utterly, very, very dominated by logos thinking. Okay. Almost overwhelmingly dominated by it. So we really need to think about is that a good thing? So is it reasonable? How do we decide if something's reasonable? Okay. By the way, as I go through this, you should be annotating to see how I'm doing or what I'm doing to achieve the criteria. What has logos achieved? That might be one thing to think about. Are there other or better ways to achieve it? What are the consequences of embracing logos, and what are the limitations of logos? Okay? So those are the kind of things I'll be thinking about as we look at some different areas. So if we look at logos and its impacts on chemistry, okay, and science in general, it is true to say, and Thomas Hobbes did say, that really until science came along, life was nasty, brutish and short. Okay? We are living in the least violent time in history. You have the smallest chance ever of suffering a violent death. Okay? So life is definitely effervescent. And that's really built on sense perception and reason, this sort of levels and characters. And I think science is definitely the driver behind life being less brutish, less nasty, and less short. Okay? So what has science achieved? What has chemistry and science achieved? Well, medicines. I'm on 5 of them right now. Okay? Fertilizers, semiconductors, PlayStation 4, synthetic fabrics, transportation. You just keep on going on and on and on and on and on. Virtually everything you interact with and use on a daily basis is a direct product of science and therefore of logos. Okay? So it's achieved a tremendous amount. And you can't really think how else it could have been done. How else could we have made this progress without experiments and all that kind of sciencey stuff? What? Someone who's just a very, very thoughtful author sits down and has a really good think and discovers plastics? Doesn't really seem plausible. So embracing reason has led to huge progress, and it's very difficult to see how that could have come about without that embracing. However, there's a flip side to the coin. We made this great progress, but scientific reason kind of robs the world of meaning. Okay? The meaning of life becomes just a matter of passing on our genes, and that's pretty unsatisfying. That doesn't mean I'm telling you to go out and make sense. Right. So, what about looking at different areas? That's chemistry and science. We can see unequivocally, I think, the application of logos to the study of the natural world has been a positive thing. What about in human sciences? What about in economics? So, what has it achieved? Well, it's definitely allowed us to produce a model of development, which we can call free market capitalism, okay? Which has unquestionably led to huge development in some places. It's led to previously unimagined wealth for some people, but it's also led to entrenched poverty and inequality for others. Okay? You look at some of the countries that are the most developed, and the most free market capitalist, like the UK, like the US, and you see huge levels of inequality there, huge social problems. So that's what's happened when you apply logos to economics. The alternatives, okay, maybe aren't to completely abandon logos with economics, but to bring in some of the mythos stuff, some of the emotion, okay? Because the economics deals with people, and so you can't not be emotional when you deal with people, surely. Because emotion knows what's fair, reason doesn't. Okay? So perhaps emotion needs to play a greater role. Embracing reason creates a scientific system, something that's fundamentally not scientific. Okay? I'm always banging on about this. We've tried to make economics into a science, and it doesn't have the characteristics of a natural science. It doesn't produce reliably repeatable results. You can't just say, well, if you change these variables, this will happen. Yeah? Why is it the case? Well, if you embrace reason in economics and you embrace logos, okay, reason values that which can be measured, okay, but can't always measure that which is valued. And when it comes to human lives, and that's what economics is about, that can be quite dangerous because there are important things that just don't get factored in. So it's kind of a mixed bag of economics. There's some good aspects to it, some not so good aspects. What about logos of religion? What has logos achieved in religion? I would argue it's achieved fundamentalism. Okay? Christian fundamentalism, Muslim fundamentalism, Hindu fundamentalism, Jewish fundamentalism. Okay? I don't think those things would or even could have come about without this triumph of logos. Okay? So, in fundamentalism, scriptures are seen as literal truth rather than mythical truth. Okay? And that's an important thing. Because when they were written at a time by people who didn't write literally. They wrote in mythos terms, they wrote in terms of emotion and interpretation and meaning. Okay? So there's this misapplication of logos. So if you start interpreting scriptures fully literally and using logos, okay, It's about logical argument rather than the more esoteric meaning. You end up living the word, but not the message. Okay? The product of that is the suicide bomber. Okay? Or the American church mega pastor, with his fleet of Porsches, a huge house, millions in the bank, and gay men in the toilets and motorway service station that he frequents because he doesn't want to live. That sort of stereotype of a corrupted person. That's really a direct product of this kind of logos type thing. Because a key message in the Bible is about the importance of giving away what you have and helping the poor. And it's hard to see how an American church pastor has managed that. Or Korean, it's plenty of in Korea. So what's the alternative? The alternative really is to embrace mythos. Because mythos leads to moderation. Mythos is inherently non-extreme. Okay? So, where does that bring us to? Well, if we compare the three, we've got chemistry and science in general, economics and religion. Okay? Logos has been hugely successful in chemistry. Absolutely, without a question. Chemistry couldn't work without it. In economics, it's quite useful. It does allow us to model things that have some bearing on real life. But if we use only our models, and we don't use wider things like emotion to help us understand the fairness and other impacts, then it becomes problematic. Logos in religion, I hope will convince you, is downright dangerous. But there's another pattern here. Okay? It's to do with humanity and humanness. Okay? So chemistry doesn't involve any humanity. It doesn't have any consequences for people. We're just playing with chemicals that have no feelings, no emotions. Yeah. In economics, there's quite a lot of humanity. Whilst we are dealing with money and jobs and the whole economies and stuff like that, underpinning all that is people. So if we, as a chief economist of the country, make a change to tax rates, it's going to leave people jobless. Because that's going to promote growth somewhere else. You have to recognise that those jobless people aren't just a statistic, they're real people. Okay? And so where there's some humanity, you can't rely only on logos. That's what I learned. With religion, religion is only concerned with humanity and people, isn't it? Okay? Where that's the case, the logos is frankly, doesn't really have much role, is what I would argue. Okay? So, my conclusion then is that this book is a book about logos. This book is a book about mythos. And I can't really see how the two are ever going to agree. Maybe you say to yourself, well, logos is clearly the only reliable, trustworthy way to get knowledge, and so this mythos stuff is a load of nonsense. But yet this has no meaning, and it's difficult to believe when I cuddle my 3-week-old son that he has no meaning. So, in conclusion, the triumph of logos is reasonable in areas that don't involve humanity. Okay? So in stuff like maths and technology and science. Yeah? Where humanity is involved, where there's a human impact, then logos can't be the only thing we use. We must bring some feeling and some understanding into it. And finally, logos gives us the power to build better lives, which it clearly has, but it doesn't give us a reason to do so, and that, I think, is why we need